Hello, Daniel Yuck here. Thank you for tuning in today. I appreciate you. In today's video, I want to dive into hand speed and voltage within tattooing. I do want to bring you all a new updated video, and I want to relay some new key points within this video. By the end of this video, you will be more acquainted with hand speed and voltage. However, should you have any questions at any point throughout this video, I'm going to encourage you to drop a comment down below. I'll do my absolute best to assist you in the best possible direction. Please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and ring that bell for me, as I'm going to be bringing more videos like this for you all. I do also have social media under the same name as this YouTube channel. I have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok all under the same name at Daniel Yuck. I would truly appreciate the support over there as well. If you enjoy my videos and find my channel helpful, consider becoming a Patreon or sending over a super thanks, as I would greatly appreciate your support. With that being said, let's go ahead and dive straight on into this. I'm going to start at the very top with hand speed and voltage before we get into actual demonstrations here, and I want to touch base on some key points. From my experience through tattooing, I am able to align at essentially any voltage. What I do have to do is I have to adjust my speed to the voltage that I would be running for any given situation. At the beginning, I thought it was about pressure and how hard I would press into the skin that would determine how saturated a line would come out. That's kind of the approach that I had again in my earlier days of tattooing. However, over my time, I quickly learned that that's not the way that we would want to look at hand speed and voltage and or proper needle depth. Let's keep in mind that pressure does definitely have a role to play within the tattooing process. However, hand speed and voltage is something that I feel is often overlooked or probably misinterpreted at the beginning of our tattooing phases. And by the end of this video, again, I want to kind of clear it all up and kind of give some more insight on how this would work, so to speak. When I'm thinking about voltage, I'm thinking now about how many times a needle would cycle through. Although I don't know specific, specs in terms of how many rounds per minute a specific tattoo machine does cycle or anything like that. I also don't have any tools available to me to measure something like that, so therefore I wouldn't be able to give, accuracy with this machine does this many rounds per minute, this machine does this many rounds per minute. I wouldn't be able to get into those sort of specifics. However, what my brain does now, after experiencing certain machines and trial and error with different techniques and applications, I'm thinking more about a mechanical, practical approach when it comes to hand speed and voltage. I'm thinking about the rounds per minute that a machine is doing. So let's just keep that variable in mind, how many times a needle would cycle through. And what I'm saying is, whenever a needle comes out to deposit ink, it comes back up and comes back out again, comes back up and it comes back out, and you get the idea. So that right there is one cycle, two cycle, three cycle. You get the idea. So how many times per minute? I'm really mindful of that. So most machines nowadays, we can reach a voltage range on average from about 5 volts to 12 volts is typically what I've seen within tattoo machines. I've also seen some power supplies go as low as 3 voltages all the way up to 14, 15 volts. You get the idea. So we do have a wide range of voltage that we can use, and when we are hiring the voltage, the more rounds per minute there's going to be. When the voltage is lower, the less rounds per minute is going to be. So essentially that's how that works. So a voltage set at 5 volts is going to have less RPMs per minute than a voltage set at 8 volts. Obviously the 8 volts is going to have a lot more RPMs than the 5 volts. You get the idea. So the higher the voltage, the more ends that we're going to be going into the skin at a quicker rate. So we want to keep these variables in mind when it comes to hand speed and voltage. You want to make sure that your hand is moving at a swift enough pace, so that way when we are depositing ink, we are doing it in a consistent and stable manner all the way through. If we are moving too slow, what's going to tend to happen is we are going to go in one spot too long, and that tends to cause scarring and trauma to the skin. If we are moving too fast, then we're not going to have enough cycles to complete the line and or have a nice, consistent, clean, saturated line. The line's going to come out maybe light in some areas. It's definitely going to look inconsistent when healed. And once again, the idea behind the hand speed and voltage is that we want to make sure that our hand holding the machine is moving at a matched pace to the rounds per minute that we are using. And the only way to really find this out without external third-party tools would be to actually get some fake skin and try it ourselves, which is what we are going to do here. Right here I have an Amala this is a 0014 round liner right here. I will leave links for you in the description below to the gear that I'm demonstrating with on my end. This is going to be a T-Rex standard 7-round liner. This approach and these methods could be applied to any size needle that we're using, whether it's a 3-round liner and or a 25, 88 round shader from Inkclaw. I think the idea behind it and the principles are all the same. The only thing that really changes is, for example, let's say if we use a 14 round liner and we choose to line at 8 volts. That's great for a 14 round liner. However, let's say if we take that same fundamental and principle of 8 volts with the 14 round liner down to a, let's say, 003 round liner, and we're still lining with a 003 round liner at 8 volts, then we may be doing more harm than good in that specific instance. So we want to be mindful and I guess logical when it comes to different needle sizes and voltages. I would recommend the lower the needle size if you're using 3-round liners or really tight needles that are easier to puncture and penetrate the skin there. I would recommend to go ahead and stay in the lower voltage range. If you're using let's say round shaders like an 88 round shader from Inkclaw, then you may want to take it up to something that's a bit more comfortable for you on your end. Every setup is going to be different. The idea behind that though is the lower the needle, lower down the voltage to kind of match that to cause less trauma on the skin, and it'll give us more time to work as well. If the needle is a little bit bigger, find something a little bit more in a maybe 6, 7, 8 voltage range. And again, it is going to vary from setup to setup. If you're using a coil, you may want to kind of just listen and feel for what's comfortable for you on your end. I can't say specific, but that's the range that I feel I'm going to be using here today. Right here, I have the Ambition Mars U, if I'm correct, and this is going to be from Ambition, and this one is a 4-stroke right now. So not only do we want to keep hand speed and voltage in mind, we also want to figure out what stroke we are comfortable using. If I'm going to be doing a tattoo that is line dominant, I'm going to want to go for maybe a 4-stroke, so that way I can kind of get in and out as clean as possible, and the entire tattoo can be a one-pass line process. If I want to be doing some shading and dot work dominantly, then I'm probably going to be using something a little bit more soft like a 3.5. And again, this isn't to say that that's how you have to use them. You can you can line as well with a 3.5 should you choose to do so. However, that's going to be personal preference. For me personally, I do like the punch of a 4. I can be in and out a lot quicker, and I can do one-pass lines the entire way through, which is something that I would rather go with for a smoother workflow. To each their own. If we do choose to go with a 3.5 stroke, again, all we would have to do is adjust the voltage and hand speed, and then kind of let the needle catch and do its thing, remembering those rounds per minute. Let's actually get into the demonstration so that way I can demonstrate a little bit more about the rounds and we can actually see this up close. I want to take some time and I want to demonstrate the differences between the hand speed and voltage. I want to demonstrate when we move too fast, I want to demonstrate when we move too slow, and I want to demonstrate just right so that way we can get a good idea as to what's going on and why we should always be mindful of our hand speed and voltage. So here I have the Ambition tattoo machine, and again I'll leave links for you in the description below. Let's take it from the top here. I'm going to be running at 5 volts, and I want to show you lining that is going to be inadequate. So I'm going to demonstrate when we move too fast and we don't let the needle cycle enough to deposit the ink in a consistent manner. And that would look something like this. So although I was applying a decent amount of pressure, you can see some of the ink did take. It did go ahead and hit into a deeper layer of the skin. However, it is highly inconsistent, and you can see that the line is actually really light. So therefore, I'm kind of creating lines and tattooing with anticipation, so to speak. What I mean by the anticipation is, I know that we tend to think that as soon as we go ahead and put the needle to the skin, it's tearing open the skin and we have to be quick with it. That's not necessarily the behavior of skin or needle to skin. There is a little, room there where the needle actually needs to go ahead and penetrate the skin, giving it enough time to catch, again, to deposit the ink in a consistent manner. So therefore, if we kind of just practice on fake skin, and I would highly recommend to invest into fake skin, so that way you can kind of see this for yourself on your end. You'll quickly see that if we move too quickly, although we may get some sort of markings, we're not getting clean, saturated, consistent lines, which is what we want to aim for. Allow me to demonstrate that a little bit more, and then I will show you a close-up look so that way you can really see the lines here where we move too fast. Now I'm going to do 5 lines where I moved too fast for the voltage that I am using, and I want to show you the results. So if we take a close-up look here, you can see although we do have markings, for me personally, for tattooing, this would be unacceptable because this is highly inconsistent. There is no consistency within these lines, so to speak. They're essentially markings. They're not dark, and if this was a tattoo, let's say if this was the technical application used to apply a tattoo, we're going to be receiving a lot of, I guess, inadequate healing results. We may get a lot of fading. The tattoo definitely won't hold up its integrity the way it may initially look. So there's a lot of adversities that can happen when we move too fast for our voltage. Now, what is happening here, and these right here are direct results of the needle moving too slow for my hand. My hand was moving far too fast for this needle to do any work. There's just no way that I was going to achieve any sort of consistency with this sort of approach. And again, my needle was moving too slow for my hand. My hand was moving a bit too quick for my needle to do any work. Let's also please keep in mind that we are still at 5 volts. Now I want to demonstrate and show you how I would achieve clean, consistent results matching my hand speed to 5 volts here. It may take me a couple of tries, I may get it first try, I can't say for sure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay attention to my needle tip here, and I'm going to make sure that I allow the needle to catch before I actually begin to start moving here. So I'm going to kind of taper in, as you can see. And then I allow the needle to cycle at 5 volts, and you can kind of feel this out. I mean, this is the only way to kind of learn, is to feel it out and find out what works and what doesn't. You can see though, once I start paying more attention and being more mindful of how fast my hand is moving versus the voltage at 5, I'm getting more results right there. I'm getting more cleaner results, forgive me. I'm going to repeat that here as well, and I'm going to do that 5 times at 5 volts. Just to see where we're at. Let's wipe away. So we're getting somewhere. These are a lot more clean and saturated now. So you can see I'm very mindful of the needle depositing the ink. So that RPM, that rounds that I'm talking about, is basically the needle depositing the ink into the skin, and that has to be aligned in order for us to achieve consistent saturated results. And I think the only way to learn that is to go through it, which is why I feel fake skin is a great investment. Let me do one more so you can see I got the hang of it right here. Now I'm getting really clean, consistent, solid saturated lines, which is exactly what I want. So we can line at 5 volts, but you can see that I have to move really slow. Here we have the result. Keep in mind, we were still at 5 volts, and all I simply did was slow down my hand speed so that way I can give the needle enough time to cycle through, which is going to give me cleaner, consistent, saturated results. This is kind of the idea behind aligning your hand speed and voltage. We can be using 5 volts, we can be using 5.2, 5.7, 6.3, 7.8, 8.5. You get the idea. We can use any voltage that we choose to use. However, the higher we go, the more quicker we're going to need to move. This right here is where we want to start putting in our artistic preference. Do you want to move slower? For me personally, I like to keep it at a slower, consistent pace rather than a quicker pace. I like to do slower lines because it gives me less room for errors. I'm able to move at a more slower pace, which allows me to be a lot more accurate with depositing the ink. So figure out if you would prefer to input your lines quicker because you have accuracy when you move quicker, or do you have more accuracy when you move slower? So these are things that you may want to consider along your way. What I want to do now is I want to take the voltage up to 7 volts even. I'm not sure if you can see that there, but we are running at 7 volts even. And what I want to do is I want to demonstrate running at 7 volts, and I want to kind of show you that I have to move a bit more faster because we can see now that the needle is cycling at a quicker rate, I'm going to have to compensate for that by speeding up my hand. If I were to move at the same rate that I was with the 5-volt range, then I'm going to be causing damage to the skin. So let me try to pull some clean lines for you all here. I allow the needle to catch, and then I allow it to cycle through as it deposits the ink. And you kind of have to feel this out and find a natural flow and figure out how your machine deposits the ink and what it feels like. But the same fundamentals that I'm sharing with you here, you can definitely apply and use on your end. So you can see that I do have to move significantly faster than the 5-volt range. I'm still moving at a consistent pace where I don't cause this right here. So if I were to line at this right here at 7 volts at a faster pace, we're still going to get the same results that we did up here, even though it is a little bit more saturated or it may fluctuate. However, we're still going to get that inconsistency with the line. This line right here is probably the best line, but if we take a close-up look at it, it's still highly inconsistent in terms of ink depositing and saturation. If we take a close look here, you can see that on the left right here, this second line is the best line within this first section right here, but it is highly still inconsistent. It's not saturated. You can see this one is inconsistent as well. These would definitely fade and heal with adversities along the way. We could see that the line, the last one to the far right on the second row, is nice, clean, solid, consistent, and saturated. This will definitely hold over the healing process and heal well as well. So the way that I look at hand speed and voltage is I'm thinking about that needle and that cycling motion. I'm figuring out where I need to be in terms of hand speed and voltage, so that way when it cycles through and it's done, I'm achieving these sort of clean, consistent results. I personally feel that if we focus more on that aspect of tattooing in terms of hand speed and voltage rather than needle depth first, needle depth will kind of fall into place. So if you're kind of struggling on where to begin and you don't know where to begin, I would recommend starting off with hand speed and voltage and figuring out that and getting that down before you proceed to needle depth. Allow me to demonstrate lining at 8 volts. Right now we are running at 8 volts. I personally don't, I mean, I've experimented with lining at 8 volts, but it really depends on the machine that I'm using. For this specific machine, I would be lining probably at around 7.5. I'm going to experiment with 8 right now and see how it feels. So we're going to do the same thing here. 8 volts does feel a bit more natural in terms of motion. However, it does leave a bit more room for errors. So that's something we as the artists are going to have to weigh out. How do we want our workflow to go? Me personally, I don't mind taking my voltage down to about 6.5 and slowing things down a little bit so that way I can get more consistent quality results. I would much rather go that way than run at 8 and have to rush any aspect of any tattoo. So I'm going to go over here as well. I'm going to try and do the same thing. Right now we did some lines where we're just trying to get consistency and seeing how fast we would need to move if we were actually applying lines to a tattoo. That's how I would go about it right there, getting nice clean results. I'm going to move a little bit fast, moving at 8 volts, so that way we can see the inconsistencies there. And keep in mind, I'm actually applying a bit of pressure down when I'm doing this. If we look closely here, one thing that we're going to notice is that the rounds per minute, it's getting darker on this side right here. So on the side where we went too fast for the voltage, you can see it gradually gets darker, which means that the rounds per minute is going a lot faster, which means it's able to deposit a bit more than the grouping above it. Although these are definitely lines, the technical application may be a little bit off. You can see that the best line again is this second line right here. I did exert a little bit more force there to apply that line, but all of these lines over here have saturation. These are a lot more dark and readable versus these lines. These lines look a little bit gray, like if I did these with a dark gray wash or something to that extent. Although to some this may be acceptable, I would recommend shooting for the proper hand speed and voltage, so that way we don't have any issues when the tattoos are healing. If we apply a tattoo with the correct application, it's definitely going to hold the majority of its integrity throughout the healing process. Even if the client really wasn't up to date with the best healing practices, we can still get by and have a tattoo hold if it is applied correctly. If we're putting in these sort of results, then the tattoo is probably going to look faded already before the customer leaves the door, and we may experience a lot of adversities during healing. Here's just a close-up view of all of these lines. Keep in mind that first top row is going to be at 5 volts, middle row is at 7, bottom row is at 8 volts. Let's apply these methods right here that I'm demonstrating to an actual design. So here is a rose, and I kind of want to do this area. What I'm going to be using is this Amala standard 11 round shader. I feel that is a good configuration for this tattoo right here. For this 11 round shader, I'm going to hang my needle out around that much, and I'm also going to be running at exactly 6.5 volts, as you can see right here. I'm not sure if you can see that, but I am running at exactly 6.5 volts. I did make a video on how to select needles for specific designs. I will go ahead and leave that carded up here for you so you can check that out as well. So when I'm aligning my hand speed and voltage, again, I'm just going to be mindful. I don't want to outpace my needle. I want to work in conjunction with the rounds per minute that my needle is producing. So I'm going to start right here. I'm identifying my A to B. And I'm going to go ahead and pull that line here. Make sure that my needle catches. I could feel my needle working here. And I'm just going to keep it at a consistent and steady pace to the best of my abilities. So that way I can achieve clean, consistent results. And this is the process that I would want to repeat over and over and over until I've applied the entire tattoo to the best of my ability. I'm going to get comfortable, and I'm always going to be mindful of that rounds per minute that my needle is making. I always want to be mindful and work, again, in conjunction with my needle rounds as opposed to against it. I'm not focused on damaging the skin. I'm not focused on needle depth. What I am focused on is that rounds per minute. I'm feeling for that, and you kind of naturally will start establishing a sense of what's too much. And I also do have a video on blowing out, which is essentially just that. I did blow out my thigh for you, so I will leave that carded up there in the video for you as well, so you can check it out if you want to see what blowouts look like on human skin. What I'm going to do is I'm going to continue right here. So I'm going to identify my A point and go to B. I'm going to let my needle catch, do its work, and work in conjunction with the needle as it's depositing the ink. I'm just simply going to drag it across the skin, as you see me doing right here. And I'm getting nice, clean, saturated results. I feel that that's also something that comes natural once we start aligning our hand speed and voltage. So I'm going to kind of repeat that process with this line right here. So I'm always identifying my A and B point. I also have the tattoo journal, which allows you to practice lining from A to B on paper anywhere, anytime, any place. It is available on Amazon. Just simply search up the tattoo journal or Daniel Yuck on Amazon. You can check out the product page. I'm going to navigate from my A point to my B point. I'm going to taper it a little bit. I'm going to be mindful of my needle's rounds, and then I can kind of feel for depth naturally. And I can feel the needle depositing the ink. It gives me a certain resistance. There's like a certain bog to it. Now the reason why I'm choosing to go at 6.5 volts here is so that way I could move at a slower pace. Keep in mind, 6.5 is a fairly low voltage, so at a lower voltage I'm gonna have to compensate by moving slower for that lower voltage. I like the lower voltage right now because I'm able to be a lot more accurate with where I'm depositing the ink. And this is going to be the same thing over and over and over. I highly recommend to invest into fake skin so that way you can practice without the stress and worry of damaging skin. I don't recommend jumping into human skin. I would recommend to be patient before diving into human skin and practicing on fake skin, so that way you can be a lot more equipped and prepared for human skin. I'm going to identify my point A, identify point B. I'm just going to simply pull the line as best I can. Keep in mind, I don't want to really put my hand here and try to keep the skin down because I don't want to block the frame from you all. It tends to happen. So that's why I can't really get the skin down there. But I'm going to let my needle catch. And I'm just going to simply drag it across while I'm being mindful of how fast I move my hand. I want to give the needle time to deposit the ink here. I want you to also note that your speed may not be identical to mine even if you are running at 6.5 volts. Although you may be moving a lot slower than you would if your machine was running at 8, I don't necessarily want you to mimic identically the speed that I'm using with 6.5. What I would encourage you to do is pull lines and see where you're getting clean, consistent saturation. And once you start hitting those areas, try to really focus in on and fine tune that speed there and at that voltage, whatever voltage you choose to use for your setup. So again, I don't encourage you to copy verbatim 6.5 and try to follow my exact speed. What I will encourage you to do is get comfortable with the setup that you're using and experiment. I'm going to apply this line over here as well. I'm going to continue. Same thing, I'm going to get comfortable. Allow my needle to begin catching before I begin moving. I'm just going to stay at a steady pace until I've reached my point B. I'm not going for perfection, I'm just trying to do as best I can. Over time, all the efforts that we put in, we will start seeing progress little by little. Now, I know that some may feel that this is way too slow and that we're going to be doing a lot of damage to human skin if this were on human skin. However, I would disagree because every machine, every technical application, every artist is different. So if I'm lining at 6.5 volts, I'm naturally as an artist going to move slower to compensate for the slower rounds that the needle is depositing the ink in. And these are variables that we would have to consider when, I guess, thinking and or speculating with these sort of approaches. Keep in mind, I can line comfortably on human skin and on fake skin at 6.5 volts, and I can move at a slow, steady pace that you see me doing here on human skin and still achieve clean, consistent results with no trauma, no textures or anything like that. However, if another artist is trying to run at 6.5 volts but they're using a coil, I can't really say every single situation is going to be the same. Keep in mind, I am using a pin style tattoo machine running at 6.5 volts. And I'm using a standard 11 round shader. So again, there's a lot of technical variables to consider when assuming that damage would be done. And again, that goes back to the anticipation that I was talking about earlier. If we align with anticipation, then we're always going to anticipate that any move we make is going to cause damage to the skin, as opposed to knowing how the machines are working and or experiencing it for ourselves. So allow me to do the same thing. I'm going to identify my A point. I'm going to do it right here. And then B. Let my needle catch, making sure that it's depositing the ink in a nice, saturated, consistent manner there. And I'm going to go from A to B right here. I'll let my needle catch. And keep in mind, I'm not focused on pressure so much. The pressure naturally comes in when I'm feeling for the rounds per minute that my needle is making. When I'm feeling for those RPMs, I can kind of feel what would be too much naturally, and I can kind of feel what is just right. And again, there's a certain sense of bog that you're going to feel when you're at the correct depth, which is why I'm saying don't anticipate needle depth and or trauma. Try to figure out what your machine is actually doing, so that way you know exactly how fast to move on any specific voltage you desire to use. Forgive me for the blur there, I apologize about that. It's hard to kind of get every single frame every time. I'm going to try that again here from A to B. I have my plan of approach. I'm going to allow my needle to start making its rounds and depositing the ink in a manner that I am happy with. I'm looking for that cleanliness, I'm looking for that consistency, and I'm looking for that saturation with every single line that I pull. Every single line, I want it identical to the neighboring line. I want it as saturated as the neighboring line, and not only that, I want the line weights the same as each other as well. I don't want any line weight fluctuation between all the lines that are being put with the same needle. They should all be the same line weight as well. And I can't exhaust that we would kind of just repeat this process until we start building up that muscle memory and comfortability with our hand speed and voltage. I'm gonna start from here and go over here as best as I can. I'm gonna allow my needle to catch before I start moving the needle. Like so. Once again, identify the point A to point B. Allow your needle to catch, and you can see right there how it is catching. Took a little bit for the needle to actually start applying the ink in a consistent manner with all of 14 needles. If I were to have rushed that line, I would have achieved an inconsistent line. Let's keep in mind that I can choose to change from 6.5 volts to 7 volts, 7.5 volts, 8 volts. I can higher up the voltage. However, I am going to have to move a bit more quicker when I'm pulling these lines. For me personally, I do feel very comfortable at 6.5 volts with this specific setup and this specific needle configuration. So for me personally, since I'm getting nice, clean, consistent, steady results, I wouldn't fluctuate from 6.5 as this seems like my sweet spot. However, if you tend to be a bit more quicker, then you may want to higher up your voltage. If 6.5 volts is still a little bit too fast for you, then you may want to lower it down so that way you can slow down your hand speed. I encourage you to experiment and find what voltage range you enjoy best. Let me know in the comment section down below what voltage you use on your end. The next line I'm going to pull is going to be right here. I'm going to go ahead and do A to B. I'm going to allow my needle to catch here. Bring it around here. We'll want to keep an eye on the needle tip as it is coming in contact with the skin. Before we start moving, we want to make sure that those rounds are being made so that way before we move on to the next part, we already have saturation. So I'm going to identify A to B. Make sure I'm comfortable. I'm going to pull the line to the best of my ability. Every line, no matter how small, is going to get the exact same treatment. You're going to want to let those needles make their rounds, and then begin to move your hand accordingly. You can see the needle catch right here. The ink's depositing. It's making its rounds. All I have to do is make my way from point A to point B as consistent as I can. Here is a V-Select 18 round shader. I'm sorry, 14 round shader, standard 14 round shader right here. I'm still going to leave the machine at 6.5 volts. All I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust my hand speed to fit this voltage right here. I'm going to identify my point A. I want the leaves to be a little bit bigger in line weight, so that's why I'm switching needles. I'm going to make sure my needle catches and makes its rounds before I proceed on to the next part of this line. I'm going to repeat that process with the neighboring lines on the leaf here. And we need one more right here next to it. Each and every line, I'm gonna let that needle catch, and then I'm gonna let it make its rounds as I move throughout this line here. I personally prefer to line at this voltage right now currently because I'm able to apply the tattoo again with more accuracy, as I've mentioned here. Clean, consistent results. These lines are all the same line weights as well, which is another plus and which is what I want. This is the process that I'm going to essentially repeat until I've lined the entire tattoo. I'm going to identify my point A, make sure that my needle always is making those rounds as I go, and that is my main focus. Again, the needle depth and all of those other aspects come in naturally as I'm tuning that hand speed and voltage. Do one more right here. Here we are at a top view, so that way you can see all of the lines from a different angle and their line weights. You can see these two leaves right here were done with the V-Select 14 round shader, and all of the other lines were done with the Amala 11 round shader. There is a difference in line weights, however, for the leaves, for example, all of the lines are consistent to the neighboring leaf lines, and all of the lines within the petals are consistent to one another as well. Not only that, all of the lines are nice, clean, solid, consistent, and saturated. So the main point of hand speed and voltage is to allow that needle to deposit an ink in a manner that we are accomplishing smooth, clean, consistent, saturated results. I feel if you're figuring out where you should start, focus on hand speed and voltage, and then you can build up to needle depth to further avoid blowouts, and then from there you can start figuring out technical applications such as stipple, dot work. You get the idea, but me personally, I would recommend to figure out your hand speed and voltage and then kind of build off of that foundation. So here's another look for those who want to get a close-up look here. We'll notice on this design right here, there are in fact thinner line weights. For those, I'm going to use the Rain 005 round liner, and I'm going to input these lines with this needle size right here. I feel here's another important variable to remember. Since this is a smaller needle configuration, it's going to be a lot easier to puncture the skin. So I want to be mindful of that, and I want to compensate for that. So I'm going to also be mindful that this machine is at a 4mm stroke, which tends to be a bit more punchy and easier to input lines, which for a smaller needle configuration, it makes it more likely to blow the skin out. What I'm going to do to compensate that, I'm going to lower my voltage all the way down to 5, and I'm going to pull these lines with the lowest setting, which is going to be 5 volts that this machine offers. It's going to be the same approach. I'm going to identify my point A to B, and I'm going to try to pull those points as steady and consistent as I possibly can. And I want to move at a very slow voltage because also the lower we go in needle size, the more our mistakes show up. So if we're going to be wobbling all over the place, and those are going to pop out when we are lining. Running at a lower voltage allows me to make fewer of these mistakes. I'm going to kind of improvise right here and bring this line all the way up to this tip. The same rule of thumb that I've been applying, making the rounds, even with the smaller needle, we're going to want to apply at any time. So every needle needs to make its round. Every needle just performs and behaves a bit differently based on its configuration. On this line right here, I moved a little bit too quick right here, so I can slow it down a little bit. I have a little bit more room, just a little bit, to kind of pace myself a bit more. So I'm going to identify my A to B. So if we look carefully, there is a minor inconsistency with this line right here and this line. On this line right here, I kind of pulled it with a bit of anticipation, which means it's a little bit lighter right here and a little bit thinner than these lines next to it. For me personally, I'm not going to fixate too much on that. I am in fact going to leave it alone and move on, because if I don't get accurately right where it's at right now, then it is going to look bolder over this one. It is going to kind of be a war of shaping them from that point. So I'm going to leave it as it's not bad at all. I'm just going to be mindful though of that anticipation and not repeat that again as best as I can. Same thing here. I'm going to identify where I want my A and B, and I'm going to apply the line as best I can. The same fundamental principle that we were using on the thicker line weights, we are using on this thinner line weight. All we're doing is we adjusted the voltage to compensate for the thinner line weight, and I'm just simply adjusting my hand speed to match and complement this configuration that I'm using here. Every single line should have great care going into it, so that way they can come out clean and consistent as they possibly can be. Let's do a couple of more, and then I'll bring you to a top angle so you can see all of the lines here. Even though it's a smaller configuration, I'm still letting the needle make its rounds as it has to. If not, we're not going to get that consistency. We're not going to achieve that saturation that we're looking for. Here we are at a top view, so that way you can see all of the lines and their neighboring lines. You can kind of measure their consistency and see their saturation. I am going to complete this tattoo, and that will be for another video. So if you want to see this tattoo completed, be sure to subscribe and ring that bell for me, as I'll upload that video for you all as well. I feel like for now, this is a great place to conclude this video on hand speed and voltage. We really want to be mindful of the rounds that our needle's doing, so that way we could achieve the most clean, consistent, saturated results possible. If I did touch base on something specific, or if you have any questions at all, I'm going to encourage you to drop a comment down below. I will do my absolute best to assist you in the best possible direction. I do have social medias under the same name as this YouTube channel. I do have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. I would truly appreciate the support over there as well. Please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and ring that bell for me, as I'm going to be bringing more videos like this for you all. If you enjoy my channel and find my content helpful, consider becoming a Patreon or sending over a super thanks, as your support would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate your time. You have a great day.